Somewhere along the line, somebody probably looked you in the eye and said, follow your dream. It's not something most of us are opposed to, but how many of us actually do it? Today's guest not only did just that, he provided us with one other powerful lesson. You are never too old to follow that dream. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk, and we'll not only hear his story, we'll hear how his story can inspire you.
A pocket-sized pep talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Robert Miller, is the leader, bassist, composer, and the creative force behind the band Project Grand Slam. His band plays a unique fusion of rock and jazz with just a twist of Latin. And in just the past 5 years, PGS, as the band is called, released 10 highly acclaimed albums, including a #1 Billboard album, had over 4 million views, 1 million Spotify streams, over 50,000 Facebook fans, played festivals, concerts in the USA and abroad, and opened for some amazing artists, which we're going to discuss a little bit later. And he's done all this in his 60s. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, you're an interesting guy. I wanted to be a fireman. Then I wanted to be a basketball player. I lacked a little size. You, the rock star, that's awfully impressive. But you followed this dream and you became a rock star in your 60s. How in the world did you do this?
Isn't that nutty? I mean, it really, it's so backwards and it's so nutty. Look, I had this dream when I was young. I always wanted to play music. I always did play music. And, you know, when I was in my teens, I wanted to be a rock star, a famous musician. But you know what happens to people? Life gets in the way. It's a terrible thing. It's a funny thing, but it usually happens to people. And it happened to me too. You know, I was going down the path of playing music. I wanted to do music full time, but I had to make a living. When I graduated college, I was a broadcasting major in college, and I was able to somehow finagle a position in the mailroom of a big public television station in Boston. So, and what I thought I was going to do was spend, you know, about a month or two in the mailroom. Then I was going to go up. I was going to get into the production side of television, which is what I wanted. And I was going to be playing music at night. So I had this combination of broadcasting and music. It was going to be fantastic, except I didn't get out of the mailroom so quickly. It was an era of high inflation and low job opportunity. And 1 month turned into 1 year in the mailroom. And I said, and I was playing at night with music, but between the two jobs, if I made $100 a week, it was a lot. This was not a self-sustaining career. And all of a sudden, my dream had to change because what could I do? And so I went off on a completely different path. And it took me an awful long time to get back on that dream path.
Yeah, but you got back to it. That's what's so impressive to me. I mean, I'm sort of smiling. I don't think I've got the knees anymore to be that basketball player, but I am sort of scratching my chin, going, might revisit that fireman piece a little bit. You got back to it, and I think that's what I think anyone can identify with the part about life getting in the way. Heck, I was also looking to be an actor. My father was not having any of it while I was in school, so I did a couple of shows on the side, then did some dinner theaters when I got out. But the living thing got in the way, and you blink and you're kind of on the other side of a career. But you got back to it. That's something that it just has to fill you with pride. So as a musician, what are you most proud of?
Well, I'm really proud that I did it. You know, I jumped in the deep end of the pool. I had just passed my 60th birthday. And of course, we all say 60 is, you know, not the 60 that it used to be. 60 is the new 40. But you know what? 60 is still 60 years old. And it was a long time away from my youthful dream. I kept it alive in the sense that I continued to play, but I was playing more like a hobby, more like an avocation. It wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't the dream that I had when I was younger. But when I hit 60, I said, okay, look, how much more time do I have? If I'm not going to do it now, when in the world am I going to do it? And I simply made the decision, as I said a moment ago, to jump in the deep end of the pool. And the great thing about it is that it worked out phenomenally well, much better than I ever could have expected. As you said at the beginning, here it is 5 years later. I've got 10 albums, including a Billboard #1, 4 million video views, a million Spotify streams. I've played concerts and festivals around the world. I've opened for some fabulous artists like Edgar Winter, Blues Traveler, Boney James, Mindi Abair, did an after show for Yes. I played a concert in Serbia, which was my aha moment. Okay. When people say to me, when did you know you made it? When did you become a rock star? I said, imagine this. I get invited to play a festival in Serbia in Eastern Europe, if you don't know your geography too well. And the festival is being held inside a fortress that's about 700 years old. You have to cross the moat to get into the fortress, okay? And inside the fortress, they set up two stages so that they could have one act going and the other one setting up. And here we are performing before 20,000 people in Serbia. None of them spoke English, none of them knew our music. But by the end of our performance, we had a standing ovation. And when I walked off the stage, there was a line of people there waiting to take our picture and get our autograph. That's when I kind of knew that this was all working out pretty well.
Wow. Yeah, I went to Kuala Lumpur once, and I remember before I got there, they didn't know what I looked like. It was just we're talking on the phone, etc. And I said, they said, we'll meet you in the lobby. I said, well, how are you going to know if it's who I am? If it's me? And I said, you'll be the big, tall American. And I said, I don't want to disappoint you, but I'm running 5'10" when I stand up nice and straight. They said, you'll be the big, tall American. But when I got there, I remember putting on seminars. I wasn't playing music like you. I was just putting on seminars, and people were coming up with their programs and their participant guides for me to sign. And I remember thinking at that time, boy, when they're asking for your autograph, even if it's on a participant guide, it felt special. But I want to push you back for a second. You hit on something really important, and that is the trying aspect of this. How many people are listening right now who can't get past the try and possibly fail piece? Meaning, uh, you know, you've tried and you went after this piece. It tremendous. You hit wonderful success. But even if you didn't, Robert, you tried. You went after your dream. You followed your dream. And I think one of the messages I'm hoping that you'll agree with here is that the success part of it is cherry on the sundae. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. Where I'd like to reach through the screen and shake your hand is having the courage and the guts to say, I'm going to try. If I make it, I know what that's going to feel like. And if I don't make it, I'm going to dust myself off, get back up, and try again.
100% correct. My view is we all have a dream when we're young. We probably still have that dream. Most of us have put that dream aside for whatever reason. And as we said earlier, life has gotten in the way and we've gone in a different direction. But that dream is there. And what I found, and what I believe everybody else can benefit from something like this, is that, as you just said, it's the act of trying that gives you the inner satisfaction, the happiness. We never want to get to a point at any time in our life when we regret that we didn't do something. Okay. You only go around once. You don't want to have regrets. And I would have regretted forever if I had not given this a try. The fact that it has succeeded, as you said, it's like you called it cherry on top or icing on the cake. It's exactly right. The game is not winning or losing, succeeding or not succeeding. It's trying. That's where you're going to find the inner happiness. And that's why I started my podcast, Follow Your Dream, because I wanted to encourage and motivate people to do that act, to take the step necessary to follow their dream, to pursue it. If they succeed, great, you keep going. If they don't succeed, well, that's okay too. Not every dream is going to succeed, but that act of trying, that act of going for it, that's where the inner satisfaction comes from.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie Defending Your Life?
Yes, I have.
And if you remember in that movie, for those who haven't seen it, that's Meryl Streep. It's Albert Brooks who wrote it, starred in it. But it's a beautiful movie from the mid 90s. And it focuses on one thing, as you know, in our lives, when we are forced to review our lives and see whether we really, could be defined as a successful life or maybe a life we want to try again. The criteria used in that movie was, did you overcome your fear of failure? That was the criteria. And I found that fascinating. The times where fear has held us back, and those are not periods of time in our history where I look at proudly. And the times where fear didn't hold us back. And like we were both agreeing on this, sometimes we got just what we wanted, and sometimes we got a punch in the nose, but we didn't quit on our stool. We didn't let fear hold us back. That was the message of that movie. And I thought, if you haven't seen that movie, folks, go rent that movie, check it out on Netflix, whatever. But it is worth seeing. Anyway, that's where we're at right now in this conversation. It's one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on the podcast.
Well, you're correct that fear of failure invades almost everybody. Nobody wants to be a failure. Nobody wants to think that they're being made fun of. Nobody wants to have people laughing at them. And people have this innate view that if they try something and it doesn't succeed, they look foolish. And you have to get that image out of your mind because it's exactly the opposite. Think of all the people that have invented things, that have done great things in this life. None of them started out and had 100% success with whatever the first thing is that they did. They probably all went through dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of failures before they finally worked out the formula or the issue to get to where they wanted to go. That's just part of life. I like to say that the dream journey is never a straight line. It's one step forward, two steps back, three steps sideways. And I believe that everybody in everything that they do, including a dream journey, needs an action plan. And what's an action plan? It's a series of baby steps that takes you from point A to point Z. It breaks it down so that you have an ability to actually view the journey in bite-sized pieces so it doesn't seem overwhelming to you. And every action plan has to be adjusted. You know, I like to quote the boxer Mike Tyson, the heavyweight champion. They asked him, "Do you have an action plan when you go into the ring?" He says, "Everybody has a plan when they go into the ring until they get hit in the face." Okay. And then you have to adjust. So that's what I did too. People that are listening today might think, okay, the guy just decided when he was 60 to start playing music full time, and all of a sudden he became a big star. Didn't happen that way. I can't even begin to tell you how many evenings we were playing for an empty house. It was a private concert, for the bartender and the waitress. That's just the way it is. Now, if you get to a point in music where you say, oh my God, I can't stand this anymore. I can't go through this. You'll never get anywhere because everybody has scuffling days. Everybody tries things out, figures out what works, what doesn't work. You try and keep the things that work. You try and get around the things that don't work. The game is to try and move forward in a positive manner. And if you can stick to it, and sometimes it's awfully rough. Okay, I don't mind saying that there were times when I said, am I wasting my time here? Am I kidding myself? But you know what? At each juncture, at each fork in the road, as Yogi Berra once said, you reach the fork in the road, take it. um, what happens is you are faced with a choice of a direction to go in. And as long as you can figure out something that keeps you going in a positive direction, you're going to move towards that dream journey.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I'll add one more thing. We'll jump off this person. You and I could just stay here for the rest of the podcast. But for me, 28 years ago, when I had two father-in-laws in a living room and I was explaining why I was about to leave Xerox, in my cushy job and go become a professional speaker, I remember telling them, it's an itch. I have to scratch this itch. And if I succeed, I'm going to be very excited. And if I don't succeed, A, I'm going to be proud of myself for trying. And B, I won't be haunted by that itch. What would have happened if I ever scratched it? So I guess what I'm presenting back to you, Robert, is I just don't see a downside to going after those dreams, even if they don't have storybook finishes.
You know, so far in the podcast, I've had a number of VIP guests, people like Cousin Brucey, who's, you know, one of the most famous air personalities that's ever been on the radio, a guy who was the head of marketing at CBS for 30 years, people of that sort that had a dream and they succeeded. And the common factors that they all talk about are remarkably similar. Okay. It's persistence. It's getting over that fear of failure. It's the idea of trying, never giving up. That's what it's all about.
I, I couldn't agree with you more. And then there's this thing called a pandemic, and it certainly hit some harder than others. But for you, what have you had to do musically during this pandemic? What have you been able to do or get accomplished?
You know, you're absolutely right. Musicians were probably hit harder than almost any other group because all of a sudden we just could not play live anymore. My band, Project Grand Slam, we played our last gig in the middle of February 2020. And fortunately for us, we had just finished an album called East Side Sessions in January. So what we would normally be doing is going out on the road and promoting that album. We couldn't do that, of course. And I was faced with the choices that you're talking about here. What do you do in the middle of a pandemic, particularly when you don't know when it's going to end, what the consequences are, et cetera. You just know you can't play live. So the first thing that I did was I said to the guys in the band, I said, let's do some videos. So we did videos of 4 of the songs from the album. The first 2 were those Zoom kind of videos where, you know, you got everybody in their little box on the screen.
Brady Bunch, as I
we're
call
all
it.
lip
Yeah.
syncing and lip playing because you can't actually play live in these things. There's a technical reason why you can't do that. But that did pretty well, those 2 videos. And then the third one, we started to get adventurous and we did something that was an animated video. Okay. And the third, we got even more adventurous. We synced our song to a 1960s spaghetti Western movie that actually had a plot that was similar to the theme of the song. So if between all 4 of those videos, we probably got 1 million views on YouTube, which was very satisfying. And then the second thing that I did, I write music. I constantly write no matter where I am and no matter what's going on. So I was writing music during the pandemic. And starting around June, I decided that I wanted to record a new album. Well, ordinarily, the way we would record is we would go, I'd bring my songs to the band. We would be in a rehearsal studio setting. We'd rehearse feverishly. And when we were ready, we'd go into the recording studio and we would play live in the studio. That's an old-fashioned way of recording an album, which I personally love. And we'd finish the album in a day or 2. Well, we couldn't do that now. We couldn't rehearse in a studio, and we couldn't record in a studio. So we started to do things remotely. There was only one problem. I didn't have a studio set up in my home. What did I have? I had my iPhone. So I started to record the new songs on my iPhone. If you're listening, Apple, this is a moment for you, okay? And I would then send the material that I had to my engineer in New York City by email. He would somehow miraculously improve the sound quality. He'd send it back to me. Then I'd send it to my guitar player. He'd put his, changes on there. I'd send it to, each one of the members of the band. Well, anyway, we put together the album in this fashion. And I realized as I was doing it that all the songs on the album that I had written had 2 different emotions. One was, I'll call it a pandemic-related emotion. We were all fearful, we were all depressed, we were all wondering what was going to happen to us from the pandemic, and that got infused in a number of my songs. And another thing that happened was I realized, at least for me, there was one emotion that was going to get us through this pandemic over every other, which is love. Because love is the most powerful emotion that we have. We had no vaccines at the time, of course. So I then decided these songs were so personal, I needed to sing them. And even though I had never been the lead singer before, I put out an album. I said, okay, I'm going to call this a Robert Miller album instead of a Project Grand Slam album. And we did this album. I called it Summer of Love 2020. And some people got the title and others said, what are you talking about? The Summer of Love was 1967. This wasn't a summer of love. Well, for me, it was a summer of love because the songs embraced this emotion of love that I felt was going to get us through the pandemic. And the very, very nice outcome to all of this is that the album has gotten just spectacular reviews. So it heartened me to no end. And it led me, I'll just finish this by saying, I've now just recorded another album in the same fashion that I've just described. And it's going to be coming out probably in the next several months. It's called Miller Rocks, because this album, even though my band Project Grand Slam is more of a fusion of rock and jazz and Latin, my roots are in rock and roll. And so the songs that I just happened to feel that I was writing for this new album are more in the rock vein. And I said, let me do something in that vein and just go with it.
Well, Miller, you do rock. We'll get to it at the end of the podcast, but let's insert it here too. For people who are listening, where are they going to find this? How do they find you?
Well, they can find me at the Follow Your Dream podcast, which is now, I'm pleased to say, on all of the major podcast platforms. And we come out with shows on a weekly basis. And my music, they can find at projectgrandslam.com and also at thepgsstore.com.
Good. Okay. And we'll touch on that again. And so you just mentioned something. You did one other thing during this pandemic, and that is you started a podcast. Okay. So welcome to the party. It's the Follow Your Dream podcast. Give us a little bit more information on that.
Well, again, I realized that I had a story that probably nobody else has, that I went into music full time with the intention of becoming a rock star in my 60s. And I realized that you're never too old and it's never too late to follow your dream. And if I could do it in music, which is a young person's game, I said to myself, anybody can do this in almost any area that is their dream. And dreams come in all different shapes and sizes. It can be a new hobby. It can be a new business. It can be a new skill. It doesn't have to be, like me, reaching for the stars. And I said to myself, okay, if I could do it, maybe there are things that I've been able to learn from this experience that I could impart to others. And what I wanted to do when I set up the podcast was have a podcast that would hopefully inspire and motivate others to do what I did, which is go for your dream. So that's what the podcast is about. And it's more or less the flip side of my music, because one of the nice things that I do to integrate the two, because music is the manifestation of my dream. So every episode, there's an introduction like you have for your podcast. And underneath the introduction, I have a different one of my songs playing that happens to be related in some fashion to the guest or the subject of that particular episode. And I introduce it and I give a little bit of an introduction. And I tell everybody at the end of the episode, I'm going to tell you more about the song, why I wrote it, how it relates, etc., and play the entire song. So there's kind of an integration between the podcast and my music.
Well, and you just answered another question for me, because I always like to figure out, all right, there's a few podcasts out there. What makes it unique? But folks, you just heard the way Robert is describing that. I've listened to plenty of podcasts, and I really haven't heard one put together quite that way. Robert, you're a performer, and so I'm sure that you've seen this. I know as a professional speaker, I see some similarities between what I'm doing and the world of podcasting. How about as a musician? What are some of the similarities you see between the music and and now moving into this podcast world.
Well, you're right. You're performing in a different context. When I play music, I'm performing on a stage before people that are obviously live in the audience. When I do the podcast, I feel like it's the flip side of my creativity and my performance in music. Not only am I relating my music to the subject and the guest on my podcast, but this is part of me as a creative being. And what I wanted to do with the podcast is not just have something that sounds just like everybody else's podcast. I wanted it to be inspirational, but I wanted it to have that additional connection to my music. And I wanted to have people on the podcast from all different walks of life. This is not a music podcast. This is not me only interviewing musicians. So far, I've interviewed people in music, in medicine. I've got a former FBI agent that's coming onto the podcast soon. Why? Because all of these people followed their dream and succeeded. And that's the nature of the podcast.
Beautiful. I will tell you that, as a sales guy, I'm always looking for a niche. You can't be everything to everybody. Um, means you're nothing to everybody. So I'm always sort of looking for that niche. And like I said, even just meeting you, your music is a little bit different. Your career path has been a little bit different, and even the podcast that you're putting together, coming in with the music, sort of integrating that music, and then the theme, very, very unique. Every time I have the pleasure of interviewing people like you, Robert, and they have a story, and there's an integration of creative ideas like yours. As an author, I found myself sort of thinking, it's got to be a book there. What about you? You ever thought about writing a book?
It's funny you should mention that. I decided to do the following. As part of the start of the podcast, I put together a 3-page PDF that I call my dream roadmap because I wanted to try and synthesize my philosophy so that I could give this to somebody complimentary so that they could kind of follow along. And I used the DREAM acronym, DREAM, as my means of communicating this dream roadmap theory of mine. And then I said to myself, okay, if I'm going to do a 3-page PDF, maybe there's a way to elaborate a little bit more on the subject that we're talking about. And because it's so involved with me and my background and how I got to this, I said it's kind of like a combination of a mini memoir and a how-to. And so I put together what I call the Follow Your Dream Handbook. And it's going to be relatively short. I called it a handbook because, again, it's intended to help people figure out how to follow their dream. And at each point in the handbook, I try to relate the subject matter that I'm talking about to the people that are reading it, so that they can really almost interact or engage in the subject matter. Um, so I expect that I will be publishing this little handbook, and I'll be offering it as part of my podcast. And now I'm going to be part of the world of being a mini author, as I call it.
We could strike that mini part off. You're going to be one of us, but you got to have it. You got to have an ISBN number before I'll be able to have a cup of coffee with you,
All
right?
right.
I want to be, but watching your career and watching how you follow that dream, if I were in Vegas, I'd be betting heavily that this book will come out, and it'll come out relatively soon. So congratulations. I know that that's quite a journey. And I actually really like what you've described. I can't imagine a book of this nature being, a war and peace. I think, so I love the fact that, as you just said, it'll be interactive. I love the fact that anybody's listening who picks up that book can not only be inspired by Robert Miller, but can sort of follow along and not only follow his story, but build a story of your own. And so I just think that's exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
I
So,
appreciate that.
well, you know what? Like everything else, books don't write themselves. I'm quite sure that that took some work, and I applaud you for it. Robert, what's next? What comes after your podcast, your book, music? Uh, are you going to clean windows? What happens next? Where do you go now?
Remember the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile? That's going to be my nighttime job. Um,
You know what? I don't know if I'd want to do it for too long, but if you get that vehicle, come pick me up. I'd like to take a spin in it.
You know
Uh,
what? I got a very full life. I enjoy what I do. Music was the focus of my life for so long. Adding the podcast into this has been really so interesting and so nice from my point of view. Meeting people, talking to them, seeing how much we have in common, even though they're involved in all different kinds of businesses and professions. So I'm looking forward to continuing the podcast. I'm looking forward to continuing to make music. I got this book coming out, so I got no complaints.
yeah. Sounds like you're a busy man, sir. Let's hit it again. Where can listeners find you and learn more about you?
Best way would be listen to the podcast. I'd really love to have people get behind it. We're just kind of starting out. We just put the first episodes out on March 15th. So we're a pup in the podcast world. It's followyourdreampodcast.com. If you go to any of the search engines for the major podcast platforms, just put in Follow Your Dream. You'll see this picture of me with my sunglasses on in black, because that's kind of my road warrior garb. So you'll be able to figure that out and listen to the podcast, and and write me. Tell me what you think. My email is robert@followyourdreampodcast.com. I'd love to hear from people. In fact, I'm going to try and get some of the people that listen to the podcast to come on the podcast as guests, so that we can kind of go through each person's dream and kind of help them figure out, are they on the right path? What kind of motivation do they need? I want this to be, again, inspirational for people. And with respect to the music, everything to do with my music is on my band's website, which is projectgrandslam.com. And also we have a store, because, you have to have a store. And you got everything there, including the merchandise and all the mishigas, as we say, that goes along with the music. And that's the pgsstore.com.
Well, the beauty of having a podcast is having the joy of sitting down with people like you, Robert. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing your story. And not only am I looking forward to seeing that book come out, I'm looking forward to where that next dream is leading you, because I don't think you're done. I'm going to be watching. So I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I think you've inspired me. I can't believe anybody who's listening to this hasn't got a little piece of that inspiration too. Stay safe, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.